Hi everyone, welcome back to Risk Grustlers. In this podcast series, we dive deep into the journeys of risk leaders, exploring how they navigate the ever-evolving terrain of cybersecurity. Today's guest is Srikanth. He's the founder of Kitecyber. So welcome, Srikanth. Glad to have you here. Thanks for taking the time. To begin the podcast, can you share a bit about your journey in cybersecurity and what led you to co-found Kitecyber?
Absolutely. So I've been in the cybersecurity and the networking space for the last 30 years. And cybersecurity has been very interesting and intriguing to me for a couple of reasons. So the main one is um, that it has always felt to me like it's a game of whack and mole. Just when you think you've solved a problem, uh, another one pops up in an unexpected way, right? And over the years, I have realized that businesses um, don't just need someone reacting to threats, but they want somebody or a solution to be anticipating and preventing them from happening because it doesn't slow them down um, in their own business and it's not a distraction, it doesn't end up as a distraction, right? And that realization has led us to co-found Kite Cyber. And our thesis has been validated by customers and partners alike who often tell us that visibility is great, but the way the data laws are shaping up, it is presenting them with new headaches, especially with laws requiring responsible disclosures to affected customers and partners. So our goal at Kite Cyber is to aim or strike a balance between making security actionable but not overwhelming.
Could you talk a little bit more about that when you talk about security being actionable but not overwhelming? Uh, can I be a little provocative here and ask you to share a couple of examples or anecdotes where you felt like security was overwhelming, and to whom does it end up becoming overwhelming?
Right. So it starts with when you have let's say an incident. The first thing that crosses your mind is, um, have I been impacted? Right. And if I am impacted, what is the extent of exposure? And so typically it cuts across the organization, and these days it is a board level conversation. And so it starts with at the top, but obviously, um, incidents response is not easy because there's a lot of data that's being generated. As you know, cybersecurity is fairly fragmented to a point that every single tool out there starts sending in signals, and the idea is you race against time to put these signals together and come up with the right exposure. And of course, if you're a public company, you're now under pressure to put out a statement as quickly as you can. There are then the finance teams and the legal team that come in to understand the potential exposure uh, of an incident like this. So I would say that it these days it touches across the organization, and yeah, what else can I say?
Fair. And see, one of the things that when we talk about cybersecurity in general, uh, for most of us, we start thinking about external threat actors, external adversaries. But insider threat is something that you've spoken about at various forums. For the uninitiated viewers, would love for you to sort of talk a little bit about what insider threats really mean and how they're relevant in the context of cybersecurity.
Yeah. So first, I'll give you a little bit of context on how cybersecurity works, and then extend to why insider threat is very challenging. So the basic construct of cybersecurity is you have this concept of untrusted entities that are validated, vetted before they become part of your trusted group that can now access your resources. Now, your insiders are part of this trusted entity, which means that they can easily break through the glass walls that have replaced these legacy firewalls.
When people talk about cybersecurity, the default is to think about external threat actors or external adversaries. But in various forums, you've spoken about how insider threats are also something that need to be taken very seriously. So, for the uninitiated viewers, can you talk a little bit about what insider threat really means and how that manifests?
Yeah. So insider threats are very difficult to um, detect and remediate. And the reason being, cybersecurity works on this concept of untrusted entities, validated, vetted, and then uh, turned into trusted entities before providing access. So insiders can normally, through that regular activity, can break through your glass firewall that protects uh, glass wall that protects your corporate resources from your internet. And so it becomes very, very challenging. Right now with the hybrid workforce, uh, it becomes even more challenging, because now your attack surface has increased so by magnitude, orders of magnitude, unlike users coming in from a premise which is fairly well, very well contained. So everything about insider looks very normal, uh, and so from a network standpoint, right? And so the origin or the source has the best context, which is your endpoint, and oftentimes that is your weak link and not very well protected. Your cloud has a very good boundary, your network has a very good boundary, but not the endpoint. So in order for somebody to detect an insider threat, the context, the user context becomes very important, which means the signals that are only present on your user's device become extremely critical in piecing the jigsaw puzzle, right? And so without that information, it becomes very hard for any cloud or network based entity to provide effective defense against insiders.
And just to simplify it a bit further for for our viewers, uh, when you talk about monitoring certain trends or activities in the employee endpoints, uh, what would be some of those activities that serve as a red flag? What do you typically monitor?
Yeah, so that is the difficult part, right? Like, how do you strike the balance between not being too intrusive versus providing the right amount of control? So typically, it is about understanding what your asset presents as risk or threat. And asset can be your user, your devices, your applications, and the user activity and the sensitive data, which matters to you the most. The idea is to not completely look at everything that the user is doing, but focus on these assets, which become your key critical context to building your trust boundary around your user's device, right? And if you're able to do that, then security gives you the right level of visibility and control without being overly intrusive.
Got it. And if I had to break it down a little bit further, Sri, between again going back to your assets or endpoints as the primary anchor, there are some potential misconfigurations or settings that give rise to risks, but there are also incidents or specific events that could be the right signals to detect insider threat. How do you sort of uh, phase it out as a company that's just beginning to start thinking about insider threat seriously? What's a very pragmatic way to start building out the program? Do all of it together? Is there like a phase one, phase two, phase three? How would you start advising companies to sort of travel that journey?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ayush. But before I do that, before I answer your question directly, so I want to kind of set the baseline for our audience here. So the way insider threat is addressed today is through behavioral aspects, and there is a lot of heuristics built around it, which means there's a lot of false positives. And to organizations, the security organizations, this is one of those myriads of alerts, false flags, and it's very, very sensitive when it comes to users, because if that false alert results in a conversation with an employee, it becomes very, very touchy at that point. So we have to be mindful about the human emotions around it. And so existing solutions have this particularly error prone challenges because it's based on probability, and the probability of which is probability of false positive is very high. And an alternative approach to that is repeating what I said before, which is um, understanding that asset very well, understanding what is that corporate resource within that, and simply just put monitoring points around it. As a simple example, right? For a user, the network activity will look normal because a user access Google, Gmail, let's say their workspace, it's a normal activity. There's no anomaly around it. Yes, these days, insiders very well understand that there are locations, there are usage, time of use, the basic parameters that are being monitored, right? So it's very easy to beat that by actually, conducting whatever activity as an insider during the normal work hours so that I don't raise any anomaly, right? So the idea here is that your network will not give you the right signal. I understanding what is critical or core to your business, which is oftentimes your data, right? The conversations that you're having with your teammates, all of that become critical part of your insider threat, or that information, if exposed, can lead to business exposure for your company. So understanding and prioritizing what matters as a business to you and monitoring everything around it is putting guardrails around it becomes very, very, very important and key to getting a handle on the insider threat.
I just to go a little deeper on that point, Sri, so you mentioned uh, employee behavior or certain unusual activities. So, what would be some practical examples of commonly occurring unusual activities, and what signals do they provide? What kind of controls can organizations preemptively put in place to avoid such unusual activities?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Let's say I take a sensitive file, and if I were to password protect it or encrypt it, right? Now, that activity and the context lies within my device. Now, if that goes unmonitored, or let's say if your existing network solutions or cloud solutions have no access to that context, that becomes invisible data activity at that point, which means that so that becomes your key, right? So classifying, understanding, and maintaining that lineage, which quite literally translates to the user activity. And let's say in this particular case example that I gave, I password protect or encrypt a file, and now I could be uploading that file. Now I do know as an insider that if I send the file to an approved site, the flags will be raised. But if I were to, let's say, abuse cloud infrastructure, let's say Windows blob storage, which is not going to raise it will have good reputation all the time, and I won't raise any alerts. So all of this activity is available only on the endpoint. So endpoint becomes your critical center of gravity, if I may, for your insider threat protection and solution.
And where does Kitecyber come into the picture here?
So Kitecyber from the outset has understood that endpoint is the core, is a key to cybersecurity, right? As why I would say this is, your cloud has a trusted boundary, your network is encrypted, so nothing can go wrong there for the most part. Your endpoint is where you have your weakness, whether it's user activity or the actions, intentional or malicious. All of those signals are critically missing. And so we've realized this from the outside that there are gaps here that has to be very well understood. So we have focused entirely on the endpoint. Our security solution is focused on the endpoint and ensuring that all of these signals are tapped in to provide the right amount of security on the endpoint.
Got it. That's super helpful, Sri. Sort of switching gears a bit here. So, a lot of Kitecyber's customers are actually small and mid-size companies or SMBs that are just beginning to get sensitized about cybersecurity or just risk management in general. I think what would be helpful isn't just to sort of remind you, not all our viewers are very security savvy viewers. There are also small company CTOs who are just getting started about cybersecurity with all the right intent. So, would be super helpful if we can outline maybe 5 or 6 key practices that are very sort of pragmatic hygiene best practices that companies can follow in terms of GRC controls or security controls that help them mitigate insider threats effectively. Where can they get started potentially? Because it can seem very intimidating, right? So what could be a very pragmatic starting point for, especially for small and mid-sized companies that often don't have dedicated security teams, don't have SOC teams, don't have analysts monitoring signals from a Kitecyber tool or XDR tools, right? So what could be those 5 or 6 security controls that are very pragmatic starting points?
Absolutely. I agree to your point that we've made the bar to adopting cybersecurity so high that a lot of times companies end up taking shortcuts.
Or the reverse happens. It seems so intimidating to begin with that that they're unable to overcome the inertia there.
Yes, it's complex. It is very esoteric. It's not easy to wrap your head around it. And what ends up happening is anytime there are shortcuts being made, and let's say you're a SaaS provider, your software ends up in somebody's marketplace, you will end up in a scenario where you're going to pollute the entire ecosystem, right? So I would say that the best way to do this is we want to simplify these tools, right? First thing is we have to do that. But then where do you start, right? It's so noisy. There are so many tools. So what I would recommend is, as you rightly pointed, you always start your journey with compliance. Even though it may not be a day one mandate, you always start with compliance because it gives you the basic security hygiene, right? It gets you into building muscle memory towards thinking security from the outset. So you start with compliance as a get go at the minimum SOC 2 in your mind, right? So once you do that, when you procure your device, you want to kind of start enforcing or start applying some of these concepts, the controls around your compliance from the day one or day zero, from the day you procure your uh, assets. And in this particular case, let's say an endpoint, right? So, you procure, you want to make sure that the device is going to be completely supervised or taken over by a software that will, without requiring any user intervention, remotely for the IT systems, IT teams to push that policy down, right? And so there are tools that will help you do that. And also, if you have custom needs in terms of your controls, you would begin there. Then the next thing is that once you have built your basic controls on the device, the next thing you want to do is make sure that your users don't get compromised or the credentials don't get compromised. Phishing, everybody knows about it. You can train all the way you want, but attackers have grown smarter. They've been using AI and what have you to dupe users in. They have so picture perfect context that it is very hard. And your security is as weak as your weakest link in your chain. So uh, whether you like it or not, attackers are going to come after you, right? And the idea here is that you want to set some basic guardrails around your internet security, because internet represents a massive attack surface for your user and your device. You can't expect users to know what is good, what is bad. So take care of the SaaS and the internet security side of things, right? And then what you also want to do is, if you are a SaaS provider that is building SaaS software, you obviously want to make sure that you have some secure connectivity and build access controls around it, right? Because obviously your compliance will also mandate that. And and it's fairly easy to do with tools these days. A tool like Kitecyber would be able to hyper converge all of these different tools into one single UI. And I'm sure there are others like us that are going to follow, or that are going to build this, right? And so your journey from compliance through basic security hygiene can be taken care of this way, right? And then for more mature organizations, you would want data security, where you're more concerned around insider threat. That's where this comes into play. And I have very practical examples where I have literally had customers who called us up and said, "Hey, I have this disgruntled employee that I'm really worried about. Can you make sure my corporate sensitive data is completely cleaned wipe, and the user is not able to access internet, and you turn the device, you lock up the device so that it cannot be used for any malicious reasons." Now, in a real world, if I had to do all of this and address this particular scenario, I would have to go through 4 or 5 different tools, right? So therefore, you need something very simple. And a culmination of all of this is what we call as the concept of hyper converged endpoint security, which helps you get from your compliance through your control, offboarding, onboarding, and everything fused into one single solution.
Why the common reasons why, because what you explained is actually fairly comprehensive and it's a very good starting point for small and mid-sized companies. But oftentimes, security programs, even the most elementary security programs, fail because accountabilities are not very clear. Who's driving it? Who's enforcing it? Who's continuously monitoring it? Right? Because employees, by their own volition or by the force of their own conscience, will often not take these things seriously. So, when it comes to small and mid-sized companies that often don't have dedicated security teams, what's your advice there? Who should own it up? How should accountabilities be fixed? Some light on that would be super helpful.
Yeah. So I would say that these days I'm actually seeing a trend where a few VC firms that I have talked to have a VCSO or a CISO that's embedded as a part of their team. Now, for the VCs,
So is that part of the pre-deal diligence, or is it something that they engage on an ongoing basis too?
so the idea is they're engaged they are engaged from day one, not as a part of due diligence, but to help maintain that there are many risks that to a VC. The risk is the team, the technology, market, and I believe that cybersecurity is also a big risk, which means that all it takes is one incident, and it can put the whole company into jeopardy. So what I'm increasingly realizing is that for companies that are very early in their phase and they're venture backed, there are these CISOs that are helping ensure that there is a minimum bar for security hygiene being set. So I think that is a very encouraging news. I believe that every VC should do this because cyber risk is a real and present problem that needs to be addressed. So that is one way that I am seeing that.
That's a, if you break it down into, say, design and implementation of the controls that you alluded to earlier in the conversation, having a VCSO like entity can potentially provide good consultative support in terms of control design. But when it comes to monitoring control effectiveness on a continuous basis within the company, whose neck should be on the line, who's the throat to choke, and who's the one driving accountability there. Especially for small and mid-sized companies that don't have dedicated security teams. Just going back to that target group, really, which, by the way, forms a big part of our viewer.
Yeah, so I would say that it is whoever signs up for your security questionnaires as well as your compliance. You're very well familiar, right? Has to be a designated CISO in a company that is signing up. Well, the idea here is that again that is the voice that is the person that is responsible or accountable on paper, but idea is it's a collective responsibility, right? Which means that helping ensure that people realize the importance of security, what if not, right? uh, whether you take whether you use security controls as your compensating control or cyber liability insurance, that is a conversation that has to be forced on by the person who's signing up for the compliance, right? And so that is one good way to force the conversation. But I'm realizing that VCs are already doing this proactively through the CISO services.
Makes perfect sense. I think one thing that this is a zeitgeist, this is a flavor of the season. We have to talk about AI here. But I'm actually curious. How can organizations leverage automation and AI to improve, very specifically insider threat management? How do you think it can help?
So there are two parts to that. If your question is prevention, I have a different answer for it. If your question is centered around detection, I have a different answer for that. So which one would you?
Love the nuance. Let's cover both.
Okay. So if you're looking to prevent, the first thing I would say is for insider threat, like I said, right? It's very hard to detect from the network signals to figure out if there is a malicious activity because it can be very easily masked. So focus primarily around uh, data that I would say has the best signal. What you do with the data, whether it's encrypting, sending the data out through, let's say, your network drive or through some site which is not going to be detected as or flagged as malicious. All of these contribute to the signals that will help you effectively prevent the activity from happening. Okay, so So discovering data, which is a big problem. Classifying data is a big problem. In this age of generative AI, it should simplify things, because in the olden days, people would talk about OCRs. Sorry for being technical, but which has a lot of false positives, and unstructured data is not easy. It's not easy to make sense, or put a context around the unstructured data. So, but in this age of generative AI, which we are ourselves leveraging very effectively, will give you very, very positive results, and there are very few false positives, I would say. Right. So that is on the prevention side, discovering, classifying, and putting the right guardrails around it. Now, when it comes to detection, I would say, as I mentioned, right, you're an insider, you've broken through your glass firewalls or zero trust, you're already in. Catching your activity in the network is very, very hard. And which means that you need to pick up signals from various entities, your endpoint, your network, your cloud, and wherever else is your touch point within your corporate network. Getting all of these signals together, assuming that they are available, then correlating, cross correlating, making sure those models are improved over time. And every different organization, because this is behavioral, uh, every organization's model is going to be very different, so there is going to be no replication, and companies are going to be very sensitive around sharing the models. So that is going to be one big challenge, right? It is laden with detection is laden with inaccuracies. It takes longer, and but then that is the another approach to take, which is gather all your data. No amount of AI will help you there, because garbage in, garbage out, and which means that you need to have enough signals in place to detect your anomalies. Yeah.
And so you mentioned multiple pieces here, in order to make a lot of sense, right? But for an organization that's trying to implement, what have you seen to sort of be the most practical approach to get started? Should companies uh, build their inference engines on top of commonly available models, be it open source or through APIs? Are there standard tools available already for each of these components that you mentioned, both for discovery as well as sort of effectiveness and implementation? Would love to get your thoughts on that. Are there any established categories that are sort of also adding peripheral capabilities that relate to some of the things that you just mentioned?
Yeah. So I would say that there is no out of the box model that will work. Obviously, the data has to be available, the logs have to be available. Now, if your context is small, medium, the context is not there, which means and plus, I don't know if there's appetite to build all of this from their own, right? And so for them it may not be as meaningful to build and do things on their own. On the other hand, again, it really depends on the approach you're taking, right? If you're trying to look for a needle in a haystack, which means, yes, I have a lot of data now, and then how long does it take for me to understand, cross correlate, and figure this out, right? So it's a big problem there. You need a lot of investment there. And the other way is to understand what your sensitivity is, right? Whether it's a user action, a network, or whatever else. And trying to cut down that data into much more bite-sized chunks, and pre-processing, and then using that enriched data to run models, I would say would be the right approach for larger organizations, so that your algorithms are more converging. I mean, they can yield results in meaningful time with less false positives.
Well, I think maybe we can pick this topic up for a later podcast. We can talk for hours on how that chunking could potentially work and how we could optimize RAG performance there. But I think at the bare minimum, even for small and mid-sized companies, using generative AI to improve the quality of data classification. Where does PI lie? Where does PHI lie? What resources are critical and are carrying PI, PHI beyond what you just mentioned, beyond just vanilla regular expression checks on top of an OCR? I think that's one immediate low hanging fruit that even small and mid sized companies can potentially uh, get value from. Uh, but Shrikant, this has been super helpful. Thanks for taking the time, and thanks for making it sound less intimidating, making it simplifying it for our viewers. Uh, Great conversation. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.